She was born Sophie Friederike Augusta, a minor German princess in an obscure corner of Europe. No one could have imagined she would become the most powerful woman in the world. While other girls played with dolls, Sophie devoured Voltaire and Plutarch. Her mind was her greatest asset, and her mother's greatest concern. The bookish child had no interest in the frivolous pursuits expected of young noblewomen. She preferred philosophy to fashion, ideas to idle gossip. Her mother despaired that such a serious, plain girl would never make a good match. But destiny has a way of finding those who are ready for it. The invitation came from Empress Elizabeth of Russia. Sophie was summoned to meet her future husband, Grand Duke Peter, heir to the Russian throne. It was January 1744, and 14-year-old Sophie's life was about to change forever. Her mother saw opportunity. Sophie saw adventure. Neither understood the true cost of the journey they were about to undertake. The journey took weeks through frozen wastelands. With each mile, Sophie left her old life behind, heading toward a destiny she could scarcely imagine. The carriage bounced over rutted roads buried in snow. Outside the frosted windows, Russia stretched endlessly, vast, white, mysterious. Sophie pressed her face to the glass, drinking in every sight. She was traveling toward the unknown, and she wasn't afraid. She was exhilarated. The Winter Palace was unlike anything she had ever seen, a monument to absolute power. Here, she was nobody, but Sophie was determined to become everything. The gilded halls stretched impossibly high. Courtiers in jewels and furs regarded her with barely concealed contempt. She was small, plain, dressed in unfashionable German clothes. She looked like what she was, a provincial nobody. But she held her head high and her spine straight. She would show them all. Peter was not a prince from a fairy tale. He was immature, obsessed with military games, and cared nothing for Russia or for her. Their first meeting was a disaster. The Grand Duke barely looked at her, too absorbed in showing off his collection of toy soldiers. He spoke only of Prussia, only of war games, only of himself. Sophie sat politely, maintaining her composure, but inside her heart sank. This was the boy she was meant to marry. This was her future. Elizabeth was looking for more than a bride for her nephew. She needed someone who could produce heirs and secure the dynasty. Sophie understood she was being judged like breeding stock. The Empress circled her like a predator examining prey. She checked Sophie's teeth as one would a horse's. She assessed her hips, her health, her bearing. Sophie endured it all with quiet dignity, meeting Elizabeth's eyes steadily. She would not be intimidated. She would not fail this test. To become Russian, Sophie abandoned everything she had known, her religion, her name, her past. She became Yekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine. The conversion ceremony was grueling. She had memorized the Orthodox liturgy in Russian, a language she'd been studying obsessively for months. As she knelt before the priests and renounced her Lutheran faith, tears streamed down her face. She was giving up everything she'd been raised to believe, but her voice never wavered. This was the price of power, and she would pay it willingly. The wedding was magnificent. The marriage was a disaster from its first moment. On August 21st, 1745, 16-year-old Catherine stood beside 17-year-old Peter in the Cathedral of Our Lady of Kazan. She wore a heavy silver gown encrusted with jewels. Thousands of candles illuminated the ancient ceremony. To the watching court, it seemed a fairy tale, but Catherine could feel Peter fidgeting beside her, could see him yawning during the sacred rites. This was no fairy tale. This was a gilded cage. The marriage was never consummated that night, or the next, or for 9 long years. Catherine was a wife in name only, trapped, humiliated, and alone. Peter came to their bedchamber drunk, bringing his toy soldiers. He set them up on tables and played war games until he passed out, never once looking at his bride. Catherine sat in the enormous bed, her elaborate nightgown mocking her with its uselessness. She understood then she was utterly alone in this golden prison. While Peter played with soldiers, Catherine studied Russia. She learned its history, learned its language flawlessly, and began to understand the levers of power. If she couldn't be a real wife, she would become something more valuable. She would become Russian in a way Peter never could. She read Montesquieu and Voltaire, Tacitus and Plutarch. She studied Russian history and Orthodox theology. She observed the court's power dynamics with the keen eye of a strategist. Knowledge became her weapon. With no husband in her bed and no child in her womb, Catherine took a lover. Sergei Saltykov was charming, ambitious, and sanctioned by the Empress herself, desperate for an heir. It was a calculated move by all parties. Elizabeth needed an heir to secure the dynasty. Catherine needed to fulfill her primary function. Saltykov was happy to be of service. What began as political necessity became something more. Catherine's first taste of passion, of being desired, of being a woman and not just a chess piece. She had given Russia an heir. Her reward was to have her son stolen from her arms. Elizabeth would raise Paul herself, and Catherine was permitted to see him only rarely. The moment Paul was born, on September 20th, 1754, Empress Elizabeth snatched him away. Catherine, still weak from the brutal labor, reached out desperately for her baby, but Elizabeth was already gone, taking the child to her own apartments. Catherine would see her son only when the Empress permitted it. She had produced an heir, yes, but at the cost of her own motherhood. Her child was gone. Her husband despised her. She was 26 years old and utterly alone. But Catherine was learning that power belongs to those who refuse to surrender. In her empty apartments, she could have given up. She could have retreated into bitterness or despair. Instead, she picked up her books, she continued her studies, she cultivated allies, she planned, she waited, and she grew stronger. Stanislaw Poniatski was different, intellectual, passionate, genuinely in love with her. For a brief moment, Catherine allowed herself to feel something real. The Polish noblemen understood her in ways no one else did. They spoke French and debated philosophy. They were intellectual equals and passionate lovers. For the first time, Catherine experienced not just desire, but genuine affection. It was dangerous, it was beautiful, and it couldn't last. Another child, another heartbreak. Baby Anna would die within a year, and Catherine's grief would be dismissed as inconvenient. When her daughter was born, on December 9, 1757, Catherine held the infant and wept, memorizing every detail of the tiny face. She knew this child would be taken from her too. And when Anna died, just over a year old, Catherine was expected to grieve quietly, privately, without disrupting the court. A Grand Duchess's personal pain was irrelevant. Peter grew bolder in his contempt. He paraded his mistress, threatened Catherine's position, and made clear she existed on borrowed time. He mocked her publicly, called her stupid and ugly in front of the entire court. He threatened divorce, threatened to send her to a convent, threatened to name his mistress as empress. Catherine endured it all with perfect composure, her face a porcelain mask. But she was taking notes. She was remembering.